The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the dusty main street of Millbrook as Cassie Rodriguez coasted her sputtering 1978 Honda CB750 into the parking lot of Tank's Auto Shop. The vintage motorcycle wheezed to a stop with an unhealthy rattle that made her wince. She'd been nursing it along for the last 30 miles, hoping to make it to the next town. But luck had finally run out. Cassie pulled off her helmet and shook out her dark hair, surveying the weathered building before her. The hand-painted sign above the bay doors read Tank's Auto Shop, since 1987 in faded red letters. Through the open garage doors, she could see several men in coveralls working on various vehicles, their voices carrying across the quiet lot in easy conversation. She walked through the entrance, her boots echoing against the concrete floor. The familiar smell of motor oil and metal filings brought back memories of her father's garage back in Phoenix, where she'd spent countless hours learning the trade. The men looked up as she approached, their conversations dying down as they took in her leather jacket, worn jeans, and the slight streak of grease already marking her cheek from her roadside inspection. "Help you, miss?" The voice belonged to a large man emerging from beneath the hood of a pickup truck. He was built like a linebacker, with arms covered in tattoos and a name tag that read Tank. His tone was polite enough, but Cassie caught the barely concealed smirk playing at the corners of his mouth. "My bike's acting up," Cassie said, gesturing toward the Honda visible through the doorway. "Started missing about 50 miles back, and now she's barely running. I was hoping someone could take a look." Tank wiped his hands on a rag, his eyes already dismissing her before he'd even seen the motorcycle. "What kind of bike we talking about?" "78 Honda CB750. For cylinder. Rebuilt the carbs myself about 6 months ago, but I think it might be electrical now." The other mechanics had gathered around now, clearly entertained by the exchange. Tank's assistant, a younger man with Benny embroidered on his shirt, chuckled and nudged his coworker. "Rebuilt the carbs herself, she says." Tank walked over to examine the Honda, circling it like a predator sizing up prey. He popped the seat and peered at the battery connections, then gave the fuel tank a theatrical tap with his knuckle. "Well, I can see the problem right here," he announced loudly enough for his crew to hear. "It looks like someone's been playing mechanic without knowing what they're doing." Cassie felt her jaw tighten but kept her voice level. "What makes you say that?" "These old Hondas are tricky machines, sweetheart. Takes a real understanding of vintage engineering to keep them running right. Tell you what though, Tank, straightened up with exaggerated effort, we'll take a look at her. Gonna be a 154 diagnosis, and that's just to tell you what's wrong. Repairs will be extra, depending on how much damage has been done." The number hung in the air like a challenge. Cassie knew exactly what a diagnostic should cost in a town this size, and it wasn't anywhere near $150. She also knew that Tank was testing her, waiting to see if she'd meekly accept his inflated price or storm off in a huff like he clearly expected. Instead, she reached into her jacket pocket and pulled out a worn leather wallet. "That seems steep for a diagnosis, but I need to get back on the road." She counted out the bills slowly, meeting Tank's gaze steadily. "When can you have it done?" Tank's smirk widened as he accepted the money. "Should know something by tomorrow morning." "You've got somewhere to stay in town?" "I'll figure something out," Cassie replied, pocketing her wallet. She handed him her phone number written on a slip of paper. "Call me when you know something." As she walked away, she could hear the low laughter and comments from Tank's crew. They thought they'd found an easy mark, another city girl who'd pay whatever they asked, rather than admit she didn't belong in their world. What they didn't know was that Cassie Rodriguez had been rebuilding engines since she was 12 years old. And she had a pretty good idea what was wrong with her Honda. She also had a pretty good idea that Tank's Auto Shop was about to learn something about assumptions. The next morning, Cassie walked back to Tank's Auto Shop with a steaming cup of coffee from Millie's Diner, the only restaurant she'd found open at 7 a.m. in Millbrook. She'd spent the night at the small motel on the edge of town, but sleep had been elusive. Her mind kept turning over the Honda's symptoms, and by dawn, she was certain she knew what the real problem was. Tank emerged from the office as she approached. Wiping his hands on the same greasy rag from yesterday, his expression was a mixture of smugness and false sympathy that made Cassie's skin crawl. "Well, "Yes, I got some bad news for you," he announced, loud enough for Benny and the other mechanics to hear. "That bike of yours has got some serious problems. Looks like whoever worked on those carburetors didn't know what they were doing. Fuel mixture's all wrong, and now you've got carbon buildup in the cylinders. We're looking at a complete engine rebuild, probably run you about 2,000, maybe 2,500. Cassie took a slow sip of her coffee, studying Tank's face. 2,000 for a rebuild on a CB750? These old bikes are complicated, Tank continued, warming to his performance. Parts are hard to find. Labor's intensive. Of course, if you want to take it somewhere else, that's your choice. But I'm telling you, this is what it needs. Can I take a look at what you found? Tank's eyebrows rose in mock surprise. You want to see the engine? Well, sure, but I don't think I'd just like to understand what went wrong, Cassie interrupted smoothly. You know, for future reference, Benny snickered as Tank led her over to where the Honda sat with its tank and side covers removed. He pointed vaguely at the carburetors, launching into a technical explanation that was impressive in its creative use of automotive terminology to say absolutely nothing. Cassie nodded along, asking an occasional question that demonstrated just enough knowledge to stroke Tank's ego. I appreciate the diagnosis, she said finally, but before I commit to that kind of expense, would you mind if I tried something? Just a small adjustment, I promise. I won't damage anything. Tank exchanged glances with his crew, clearly enjoying what he saw as her desperation. Well, I suppose it can't hurt. But when it doesn't work, you'll see why you need the professionals. Cassie set down her coffee and rolled up her sleeves. She'd spotted the real problem the moment she looked at the engine. The ignition timing was off, and one of the spark plug wires was loose. Simple issues that any competent mechanic should have caught in 5 minutes, working quickly and efficiently. She adjusted the timing with Tank's own tools, tightened the loose connection, and checked the plug gaps. Her movements were precise and confident, each action deliberate. The growing crowd of mechanics fell silent as they watched her work, their earlier amusement fading into something closer to confusion. There, Cassie said, wiping her hands clean. Mind if I try starting her up? Tank nodded, his smirk wavering slightly. Cassie climbed onto the Honda, turned the key, and pressed the starter. The engine caught immediately, settling into the smooth, powerful idle that had made the CB750 legendary. She revved it once, and the sound was pure music, no hesitation, no missing. Just 4 cylinders working in perfect harmony. The silence in the garage was deafening. Cassie let the engine run for a full minute before shutting it off, then climbed down and began replacing the side covers with the same methodical precision she'd shown in her repairs. Looks like the carburetor rebuild was fine after all, she said conversationally, not looking up from her work. Just needed the timing adjusted and a loose wire tightened. Funny how that happens sometimes. Tank's face had gone red, but whether from embarrassment or anger, Cassie couldn't tell. Benny was staring at the Honda like it had personally betrayed him. While the other mechanics shifted uncomfortably, that's quite a coincidence, Tank managed finally. Must have just needed to warm up or something. Cassie finished securing the last cover and stood, brushing dirt from her jeans. Maybe so. She pulled out her wallet again, extracted a $20 bill, and placed it on Tank's workbench. For the use of your tools and workspace, that seems fair for about 10 minutes of actual diagnostic work. She wheeled the Honda out of the garage and climbed on, firing it up once more. As she pulled on her helmet, she could see Tank and his crew standing in the doorway, watching her with expressions ranging from bewilderment to grudging respect. Thanks for the lesson. Gentlemen, she called over the engine noise. Then she rolled out of the parking lot and onto Main Street, leaving Tank's auto shop in her dust. But instead of heading for the highway and continuing her journey west, Cassie pulled into the parking lot of Millie's Diner. She wasn't quite ready to leave Millbrook yet. Something told her this story wasn't over. 3 days later, Cassie was still in Millbrook, though she couldn't quite explain why to herself. She'd extended her stay at the motel, telling herself she was just taking a break from the road, enjoying the peaceful, small-town atmosphere. The truth was more complicated. She kept thinking about the look in Tank's eyes when her Honda roared to life. the mixture of surprise and something that might have been respect buried. Under his wounded pride, she was finishing breakfast at Millie's when the door chimed and an elderly woman entered. Moving carefully with the aid of a walker, the woman had silver hair pinned in a neat bun and wore a floral dress that had probably been fashionable 30 years ago. Her eyes swept the diner until they found Cassie. "You must be the young lady who fixed her motorcycle." "At Tank's place," the woman said, approaching Cassie's booth with a determined smile. "I'm Rita Kowalski. I heard about what happened from Millie here." Cassie gestured to the opposite seat. "Please, join me." "Though I'm not sure what you heard was entirely accurate," Rita settled herself across from Cassie with visible relief. "Oh, honey, news travels fast in a town this size. And frankly, it's about time someone knocked Tank Morrison down a peg or two. That boy's been coasting on his reputation for years. He seems to know his way around an engine," Cassie said diplomatically. "Used to," Rita corrected. "His daddy, Big Tom Morrison, now there was a mechanic, could make any engine purr like a kitten. But Tank's gotten lazy, charges too much, thinks every woman who walks in there is fair game for his attitude." She leaned forward conspiratorially. "That's actually why I wanted to talk to you. I've got a problem that Tank can't seem to solve. And after what I heard about you, ... Double quotes, Rita went on to explain that her late husband's 1967 Mustang Fastback had been sitting in Tank's garage for 3 months. Harold had restored it himself over 20 years, and it was Rita's most treasured possession, her last connection to the man she'd loved for 52 years. But since Harold's death 6 months ago, the car wouldn't run. And Tank claimed it needed thousands of dollars in work. I don't have that kind of money," Rita admitted, her voice trembling slightly. "Harold left me comfortable, but not wealthy. And I can't bear the thought of selling his car without at least trying to get it running again." Cassie felt something twist in her chest. She recognized the pain in Rita's voice, the desperate hope mixed with resignation. What exactly did Tank say was wrong with it? "Oh, all sorts of technical things I don't understand. Transmission problems, engine issues, electrical faults. But Harold kept meticulous records of everything he did to that car. I brought them to Tank, but he barely looked at them." An hour later, Cassie found herself walking into Tank's auto shop for the second time that week. Tank looked up from the engine he was working on, his expression wary. "Back for more?" he asked, tempting his old cockiness, but not quite managing it. "Rita Kowalski asked me to take a look at her husband's Mustang," Cassie said simply. "She mentioned you've been working on it." Tank's face darkened. "That old lady's been complaining all over town, I suppose. Look, that car's got problems. Serious ones. I told her what it would cost to fix it right. Mind if I take a look?" Tank hesitated, clearly torn between his desire to refuse and his curiosity about what she might find. Finally, he led her to the back corner of the garage, where a gorgeous red Mustang sat under a tarp, looking neglected and forlorn. Cassie pulled back the cover and whistled softly. Even sitting still, the car was beautiful, classic lines. Chrome that still gleamed despite months of neglect, and the deep red paint that Harold had obviously lavished with care. She popped the hood and began her examination, aware that Tank was watching her every move. What she found made her jaw clench with anger. There was nothing seriously wrong with the car. The battery was dead. The fuel had gone stale. The carburetor needed cleaning, normal issues for any classic car that had been sitting unused. Tank had either misdiagnosed the problems deliberately or simply hadn't bothered to look carefully. "Have you tried replacing the battery?" Cassie asked mildly. "Of course I did. That's not the issue. The transmission's shot. And there's compression problems in the engine?" Cassie spent another 20 minutes examining the car, growing more frustrated with each passing minute. Finally, she straightened up and looked Tank directly in the eye. "This car doesn't need a rebuild. It needs basic maintenance and some attention. Harold's records show he kept it in perfect condition right up until he got sick." For a long moment, Tank said nothing. Then, to Cassie's surprise, his shoulders sagged slightly, and he looked away. "Yeah. Well, maybe I missed something," he muttered. "Been having a rough few months. Lost 2 of my best customers to that new chain place over in Riverside, and ... double quotes, he trailed off. Seeming to realize he was admitting weakness, Cassie studied his face, saw something she hadn't expected. Not just wounded pride, but genuine frustration, and maybe even a little fear. Tank's auto shop might not be the thriving business it appeared to be. "Look," she said finally, "what if we work on this together? You know this town and these people better than I do, and I have some experience with classic restorations. Rita deserves to have her husband's car running again." Tank looked at her for a long moment, clearly weighing his options. Pride warred with practicality, and slowly, practicality won. "You really think it's just maintenance issues?" "I'm sure of it. Give me a few hours with this car, and Rita will be driving it home." Tank nodded slowly. "All right. But we do this right, no shortcuts, no temporary fixes. If we're going to restore Harold's car, we do it the way it deserves." For the first time since she'd met him, Cassie found herself genuinely smiling at Tank Morrison. "Now you're talking my language." 2 weeks had passed since Cassie and Tank began working together on Harold's Mustang, and the dynamic between them had shifted in ways neither had expected. What started as a reluctant partnership had evolved into something approaching friendship, built on long hours, shared expertise, and a growing mutual respect. The Mustang purred like a contented cat as Cassie made final adjustments to the carburetor. Tank stood beside her, holding a timing light and nodding approvingly at the steady idle. "Rita's going to cry when she hears this," he said, unable to suppress a grin. "Hell, I might cry. Haven't heard an engine sound that good in months." Cassie wiped her hands on a rag, feeling a familiar satisfaction that came from bringing something beautiful back to life. Harold knew what he was doing. This car was built to last. They were interrupted by the sound of voices outside, young voices, engaged in animated conversation. Through the open bay door, Cassie could see 2 teenagers examining her Honda with obvious admiration. The girl appeared to be about 16, with natural hair pulled back and a colorful headband, and grease already staining her school clothes. The boy looked younger, maybe 14, and bore enough resemblance to suggest they were siblings. "Can I help you too?" Tank called out, his tone automatically shifting to the gruff wariness he reserved for potential troublemakers. The girl looked up, undaunted by Tank's intimidating presence. "Sorry, we didn't mean to bother you. I'm Jasmine Washington, and this is my brother Marcus. We heard about the lady who fixed her bike here. We were hoping we might be able to talk to her." Cassie stepped forward, intrigued. "I'm Cassie. What can I do for you?" Jasmine's face lit up with excitement. "My mom's car has been making this weird noise for weeks, but she can't afford to bring it to a shop. I've been watching YouTube videos trying to figure out what's wrong, but ... double quotes." She shrugged, frustrated. "I don't really know what I'm looking at." Marcus nodded eagerly. "Jasmine's really good with mechanical stuff. She fixed our neighbor's lawnmower last month just by watching videos and experimenting." Tank's expression had shifted from suspicion to interest. "What kind of noise is the car making?" "Like a squealing sound, especially when she starts it up in the morning," Jasmine explained. "It gets better after the engine warms up, but it's getting worse." Cassie and Tank exchanged glances. "Probably the serpentine belt," Cassie said. "Could be wearing out or just needs adjustment." "See, that's exactly what I need to know." Jasmine exclaimed, "But how do you learn that stuff? I mean, really learn it, not just guess from videos." An idea began forming in Cassie's mind. She looked at Tank, who seemed to be thinking along the same lines. "You know," Cassie said slowly, "there's no reason you couldn't learn. Basic car maintenance isn't rocket science. It just takes practice and the right guidance." Tank cleared his throat. What Cassie's getting at is, well, what if we taught you? Both of you. Nothing fancy, just the basics. How to change oil, check belts, replace simple parts. Jasmine's eyes went wide. "You do that? For real? Why not?" Cassie found herself warming to the idea. "Saturday mornings, maybe? A few hours each week where we work on real problems with real cars." Marcus bounced on his toes with excitement. "Could we learn about motorcycles too?" Eventually, Cassie laughed. But let's start with cars. Tank was nodding thoughtfully. Might be good for business, too. People would rather bring their cars to someone who's teaching their kids, you know? Shows we care about the community. Over the next hour, the idea grew and took shape. They would offer free basic automotive classes on Saturday mornings, aimed primarily at teenagers and women, anyone who wanted to learn, but felt intimidated by traditional garage culture. Jasmine and Marcus would be their first students, but they were confident others would follow. My friend Ashley would totally come, Jasmine said excitedly. Her dad's been trying to teach her about cars, but he gets frustrated and ends up just doing everything himself. And Mrs. Chen from the grocery store is always complaining about how much she spends at the chain place in Riverside, Marcus added. If she knew how to do basic stuff herself, ... Double quotes. Tank looked at Cassie with something approaching amazement. You know, this might actually work. I mean, really work. Of course it will work, Cassie replied confidently. People want to learn, they just need someone willing to teach them without making them feel stupid. As Jasmine and Marcus headed home, chattering excitedly about their first lesson the following Saturday, Tank and Cassie stood in the garage watching them go. You realize what you've gotten us into? Tank asked, but his tone was amused rather than concerned. Something good, I think, Cassie replied. Something that should have happened a long time ago. Tank was quiet for a moment, then nodded toward the Mustang. Rita's coming by at 5 to see the car. You want to be here when we fire it up for her? Wouldn't miss it, Cassie said, surprised by how much she meant it, as the afternoon sun slanted through the garage doors, illuminating the restored Mustang and the tools scattered around their workspace. Cassie realized that somewhere along the way, Millbrook had started to feel less like a place she was passing through and more like a place she might want to stay. 6 months later, Tank's auto shop hummed with an energy that would have been unrecognizable to anyone who had known it before. Cassie Rodriguez rolled into town. The Saturday morning community workshop had grown from Jasmine and Marcus to nearly 20 regular students, ranging in age from 15 to 73. The garage that had once echoed with crude jokes and dismissive laughter now rang with the sounds of genuine teaching, patient explanation, and the satisfaction of skills being learned and shared. Cassie stood at the front of the main bay, demonstrating brake pad replacement to a group of 8 women, while Tank worked with the younger students on basic engine maintenance in the adjacent bay. Through the open doors, she could see Harold's restored Mustang gleaming in Rita's driveway across the street. The old woman had become one of their most enthusiastic supporters, often bringing homemade cookies for the Saturday sessions. Remember, you want to compress the piston slowly, Cassie explained as Ashley Chen, Jasmine's friend, carefully worked the brake caliper tool. There's brake fluid in there. If you rush it, ... it'll squirt everywhere and make a mess, Ashley finished, grinning. Plus, it's corrosive and bad for the environment. Exactly, Cassie. The familiar warmth of pride that came from watching someone master a new skill. Jasmine, you want to show everyone how to properly dispose of the old pads? Jasmine stepped forward confidently, her movements sure and practiced after months of weekly lessons. She'd become Cassie's unofficial assistant, helping newer students and demonstrating techniques with the poise of someone who had found her calling. Tank, how are those oil changes coming along? Cassie called across the garage. Marcus just finished his 3rd one without spilling a drop, Tank replied, his voice carrying a pride that would have surprised anyone who remembered the arrogant mechanic from 6 months ago. I think we've got some natural talent over here. The transformation in Tank had been as dramatic as any engine rebuild. Working alongside Cassie had forced him to examine not just his technical skills, but his approach to customers and his place in the community. The financial benefits of their partnership had been immediate and substantial. Word of their teaching program had spread throughout the county, bringing in customers who appreciated their philosophy of education over exploitation. But more than that, Tank had rediscovered his love for the work itself. Teaching others had reminded him why he'd become a mechanic in the first place. Back when his father, Big Tom, was still alive, and the garage was a place where people came not just for repairs, but for knowledge and community. As the morning session wound down and students began cleaning up their work areas, Cassie found herself standing in the office doorway, Watching Tank explain something to Marcus, with the patience of a natural teacher, the official paperwork making, her, a full partner in the business, sat framed. On the wall behind them a decision they'd made 3 months ago, when it became clear that what had started as temporary cooperation had become something permanent. "Ms. Rodriguez?" Jasmine appeared at her elbow, holding a clipboard. "I finished updating the inventory list for next week's session. We're running low on oil filters. But everything else looks good." Cassie accepted the clipboard, still marveling at the teenager's organizational skills. "Thanks, Jasmine. You know, there's something I wanted to talk to you about." Jasmine's eyes brightened with curiosity. "What's up?" "Tank and I have been discussing expanding the program, maybe offering some advanced classes for people who want to go deeper into automotive repair. We'd need someone to help coordinate everything, handle scheduling, maybe even assist with some of the teaching." "You mean like a job?" Jasmine's voice rose with excitement. "Part-time, after school, and weekends. It wouldn't interfere with your studies, and it would give you real experience in both the technical and business sides of automotive work." Cassie smiled at the teenager's obvious enthusiasm. "Think your parents would be okay with that?" "Are you kidding? My mom's been bragging to everyone about how much I've learned here. She'd probably pay you to keep teaching me," as the last of the Saturday students headed home. Tank approached Cassie with 2 bottles of cold beer from the office refrigerator. It had become their weekly tradition, a quiet moment to decompress after the controlled chaos of teaching. "Good session today," he said, settling onto the stool beside her workbench. "Ashley's really getting the hang of brake work, and that new woman, Patricia, caught on to the timing belt replacement faster than most of my old customers ever did." Cassie accepted the beer gratefully, taking a long sip before responding. "Hard to believe it's only been 6 months. Sometimes it feels longer," Tank said, and quickly added, "I mean that in a good way. Like this is how things were always supposed to be." They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, watching the dust motes dance in the late morning sunlight streaming through the garage doors. The shop was quiet now, but it was a peaceful quiet, full of potential and promise, rather than the empty stagnation that had characterized it before Cassie's arrival. "You know what I realized today?" Tank said suddenly. "I haven't had a single customer complain about overcharging in 4 months. Hell, half our regulars tip us now." Cassie laughed. "Turns out treating people with respect is good for business." "Who knew?" Tank reached over and took her hand, their fingers interlacing naturally. The romantic development of their partnership had been as gradual and inevitable as their professional collaboration built on shared values, mutual respect, and the kind of deep compatibility that came from working side by side toward a common goal. "I keep expecting you to get restless," he admitted. "You never planned to stay in Millbrook permanently." Cassie squeezed his hand, looking around the garage that had become as much home to her as anywhere she'd ever lived. "You know what they say about the best laid plans. Sometimes what you're looking for finds you when you're not even searching." Through the open garage doors, they could see Jasmine and Marcus walking down Main Street, their heads bent together in animated conversation about carburetors and compression ratios. Rita waved from her front porch, where she was tending the flowers Harold had planted years ago. A few blocks away, the sound of perfectly tuned engines carried on the afternoon breeze as Saturday's students drove home with the confidence that came from understanding their machines rather than fearing them. "Besides," Cassie added, standing and pulling Tank to his feet, "we've got work to do. That advanced program isn't going to organize itself, and I have a feeling Millbrook is just getting started," as they walked hand in hand toward the office to start planning the next phase of their unlikely partnership. The late afternoon sun painted Tank's auto shop in shades of gold and possibility. What had begun with mockery and mistrust had grown into something neither of them could have imagined: a business, a community, a love story, and a testament to what could happen when people chose to build bridges instead of walls. The woman who had once been dismissed for simply touching an engine had become the heart of not just a garage, but an entire town's automotive education. And the man who had once thought he knew everything about fixing things had learned that sometimes the most important repairs happen not under the hood, but between people.